The secret is out. Christian ministry is difficult.
It wasn't a secret.
Maybe not, but you know what can ratchet up the stress even more? Young kids, troubles in your marriage, worldwide economic instability.
We can relate. And so here's what we do as we try to manage it all.
7 habits you need to survive Christian ministry. Well, hey there, and welcome to the Pro Church Tool Show. We're here to help you and your church navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm Brady Shearer, your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's about to share with us his holy habits. It's Alexander Mills.
Hello.
Quick housekeeping item before we dive into the habits, and that is that Social Sermons public enrollment opens today. We've got 50 open spots only. Once they're taken, that's it. Everything we do is custom. We can only work with so many churches. We've got room for 50 churches. You can go to socialsermons.com and see all that we have available.
Offering new packages, new prices.
Yeah, that's right. New
What a
prices, new packages. We're doing a lot more. And the lowest package has a more accessible price point now. So if you evaluated Social Sermons in the past, you're like, I don't know if we could swing that in our budget. There is a lower priced option now. And there are more involved pricing options as well, where we do a lot more. And it costs a little bit more as well. So check those out, socialsermons.com. Diving into habit number 1. It's real simple, and yet it's in its simplicity.
It's so bothersome how simple this one is and how challenging it is to routinely pull this off.
It's walking.
And that's not a joke.
You made a great choice listening to this podcast. You're about to get some profound insights. So here's why this was profound for me. I have been, for my entire life, skeptical of walking as a valuable exercise. I lifted weights. I did cardio. I tracked macros. Walking. Okay, that to me, that was like, yeah, sure. Like, that's a great starting point. That's a great, like, I don't know, recreation. Oh, let's go like walk in the pumpkin patch or whatever. But like, that's not going to be part of like my exercise routine. I have elevated, I have graduated to things that are more effective and optimal. Turns out I couldn't have been more wrong, and that walking is the superpower that every one of us needs to embrace. So I began going for daily walks, once daily, more than a year ago now. And the reason that I started going for them was because I was having like this chronic pain in my neck, and it was creating these headaches. And, you know, I've had chronic pain before, like, oh, like my knee or my leg, it's fine. When it created headaches, it was like, I can't work.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to just be popping Tylenol every day. And so I had gone to physio, I had tried so many different things. And I can't say that walking cured this, but walking was what initiated the habit. And I was like, okay, fine. I'm going to go for, it started being a 20-minute walk every day. And I started when it was cold. So I would go out and I'd be bundled all up. This is Canadian winter. And I'm walking and I was like, okay. And here I am a year later. I now am going on twice daily walks. I average between 12,000 and 15,000 steps a day. And the number of benefits that walking has brought into my life, it has become so important that I will cancel other things, neglect work responsibilities just to get these walks done, because the spring that comes out of this habit, it fixes everything. So just a list. Mood improvements, energy throughout the day, higher. My mind quickens to better ideas. And this was from a tweet that you sent me earlier today from Sahil Bloom. And I'll just read it. It's great. Steve Jobs had his best ideas while walking. This Stanford study explains why. You don't need research. I didn't even include research, which I normally would, to prove that walking is great. But then Alex came through. So this is 2014. Team of Stanford researchers examined how creativity levels were impacted by walking. So if all you get from today's show and podcast is like, yeah, I work in church comms, church media, I work in the church, creativity matters. I want to have more creativity. I want to have prolonged creativity.
Go for a walk.
176 participants in the study, and they had different situations. Some walked on a treadmill facing a wall. Others walked outside. Some sitting inside facing a wall, others sitting outside. Those were kind of the 4 control groups. In each situation, the participants were asked to complete a range of tasks that are typically used to measure creative thinking. The results were incredible. Participants were dramatically more creative while walking than sitting. In fact, one group of participants who took back-to-back tests, first sitting inside and then walking inside on a treadmill, saw a 60% improvement in creative output while walking and sitting. Indoors versus outdoors, though, had a similar, robust, positive impact on creative thinking. The authors concluded, many people anecdotally claim they do their best thinking while walking. We finally may be taking a step
Nice.
or two toward discovering what. Wait, is that how the authors actually conclude this? That actually makes me think the study is invalid. Imagine the researchers being like, oh,
Yes, we've been waiting for this.
I am a professor at Stanford, but you wait. I'm just going to sneak this little pun in there. Many of history's greatest thinkers, entrepreneurs, artists, and athletes have believed in the power of walking. Simple challenge for all of you. And then he does make a distinction. Don't bring your phone. No music, no podcasts, no articles, no audiobooks, just you and your thoughts. And I walk so much now that even I have gone on walks that are just completely silent. And I have a problem with silence because I am a person in process. But you can pray and walk. Mm-hmm. You can listen to books and walk. You can listen to your thoughts and walk.
Scary.
It is. But almost assuredly excellent for your mental health, for your creative health, and for your physical health as well. I love walking outdoors because it's a lifeline to the natural world. And I never had this. And you always talked about this. You're always like, oh, I'm out, I'm foraging again. That's how you talk, actually. And I'd be like, okay. And you'd be like, touch grass. And I'd be like, shut up. And now I'm walking outside, and I've done it now for more than a year. So now I've seen multiple seasons turn. So now I have an Evernote called Seasonal Rhythms. So now I have certain albums that I listen to when the seasons turn.
I got you.
For instance, my guy, our Welsh father, who is literally younger than me by a couple months, Novo Amor. Like, I can't listen to Novo Amor in the summer.
Gross.
That's not optimal. But when I got out during that crispy fall day and I put on Cannot Be Whatsoever, and I listened to the 35-minute album. Why is Novo Amor perfect? Because his albums are 35 minutes, which means there are no skips.
Yes.
And every one of those tracks is perfect. I was having an emotional and spiritual experience walking through. Like, when I walk by the barn that has the chickens in my little neighborhood, and I look and I go, are the chickens out today? And most of the time they're not. But then sometimes they're free roaming chickens. Like,
wow.
When I see the vines at the winery across the street.
It's the best thing in the world.
And the amazing thing about autumn walks is that the sun is lower to the horizon. And so it just cuts through all the trees and their peak fall foliage. Like I cannot properly articulate the physical sensations that I experience going on these walks. Also, earlier this year, I started taking my daughter, 14 months, on all the walks. She has this little stroller where she can face forward. And I take her on every walk. So we're walking now together like 2 hours a day.
So good.
And it's been amazing. She's in that period of development where she's going so fast, 14 months. Like, you know, within a few months, she'll be like saying like 500 words. But like a month ago, she had like 3. So like crazy development. And she's now begun pointing at all the dogs. And I'll say, what sound does the dog say? And she'll go, woof, woof, as she points at the dog. And then I'll say, what sound did the chickens make? And she'll go, bok, bok. And she'll take sometimes like these little hardcover books that we read at home, and she'll pretend she's reading them. She's just nonsense. She's like, and she waves to everyone. I know all my neighbors now.
Yeah.
Like, they waved to me. Oh, there's Phil.
Yeah.
Hi, Phil. And, you know, the family from school. And then we showed up to parent-teacher night the other night, and they're like, hey, would you like to volunteer for, 1 hour a month at the school? And Britt's like, I'd love to do that. And now we're getting involved in that. And, like, I met, like, my elderly neighbors. One day, I was walking by, and this house was for sale, and they're like, hey, can you, like, I put the real estate sign too deep in. Can you get it out? And I was like, don't worry, ma'am.
I walk.
A strapping young lad is here to help. So I reached down. No, it was like, it was like Excalibur. I was not the anointed man. It was not moving. And I was like, don't tell my wife about this, okay? Yeah. Like, I was all ready to have my like knight in shining armor moment where like the elderly woman is helped by the young man. No.
Yep.
Embarrassing. Wow. And she's like, maybe you loosened it up for me. And I was like, okay, that's what I say to my wife when she needs me to open a can. And then I'm like, a jar. And she's like, I got it. I was like, yeah, you loosened it up, babe. I was like, you don't need to patronize me like that, Mary. Okay, what else do I have down here? I mean, I could just go on, but I won't because we got to stick to these 7 habits. But transformative in my life in every way.
So I have also begun walking.
You have?
Yeah, not as regimented as you. Like, I don't do it every day. But that's so I started late spring, early summer, and it's easy to walk in fair weather. And so that's my question is like.
It was not easy in summer for me.
No?
Oh, no. Like,
what time were you doing it though?
Like, even if you go early, like I'm just sweating by
So
the end of it,
we would
dripping.
we would go at like 6:30
oh, okay.
because Asher's got to get to daycare. I got to get to work,
Yeah, I didn't quite go that early.
and we only walk for like a half hour, so
Okay.
it was doable.
Perfect.
But that's my
Very
concern
nice.
is like I want to continue walking, but where am I going to find the motivation to get up in the winter and go for a walk?
Yeah. It's, you know what? It's changing in the seasons. Like, it's a different mindset.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm on my grind now. No one
Yeah.
else is out here. It's just me and the elements.
Yeah.
And I will overcome.
We're having a baby in November, and people ask me how I'm feeling, and the season is changing. We're entering into fall, but I have that season in my sights because we're having a baby. It's all you think about. And I really feel like my answer is I feel like we are slowing down towards a hibernation season, like for our family, because I'm going to take a few months off work. I'm going to be home. And that's just my sense of how I see that season going from where I am right now is like, like it's hockey seasons. You're watching the game. You got the newborn on your chest. Like I don't really intend on doing anything this winter. So we'll see how my non-habitual walking works out there.
Speaking of our autumn rhythms, you had your first soup season. How did that go at the new pho place?
So the new pho place was not open. Contrary to what their website said, the open sign was not on.
Google my business, people. It's important.
And so I walked in just to see like, oh, maybe the sign's not on. So I opened the door and it's like, oh, it's wide open. I walk in. The restaurant looks done except for the fact that there's construction gear everywhere. Like men were working in there. So I like quietly backed out and we went to the other place down the street. Classic.
Because I saw your photo and I was like,
that's
that
not
looks
it.
like...
It looks like a donut diner because that restaurant is a refurbished donut diner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Soup was great. Vibes immaculate.
I'm going to make a white bean soup next week, I think.
Last night we had lentil, kale, and mushroom soup.
Okay, well,
I know.
betrayal,
I
but
know.
I love lentils.
All right.
I'm a sicko for lentils.
Maybe we'll make you that soup sans mushrooms.
Yeah, can you bring the macros though?
No.
I'll need the recipe.
Okay, next habit. This one is mine, one that I have talked about on the show before, and it's simply Sabbath. So when I say Sabbath, I mean a regular weekly rhythm of rest. And it's clear that it's imperative that I state it that clearly because I have done this. And so I know others listening will have the temptation to do this, to make room for Sabbath in some seasons and not other seasons. And so when I say Sabbath, I don't mean rest generally. I mean a regular weekly rhythm of rest. And what's challenging for those of us who work in church, and sometimes even those who just like belong to church, is that Sunday does not meet that criteria. Sunday is not, for a lot of folks, Sunday is their Sabbath. It is their daily, weekly rhythm of rest. For those of us who work in church, it is not. So even if you want to philosophically try and tell me that church is not work, which I understand what you're saying, but practically it is. It is not. The first half of that day, sometimes more than the first half of that day, is not a regular rhythm of rest. And so that makes it challenging for us because Saturdays we fill up with stuff that we can't do during the work week. So you're like working at home, maybe you're doing a side gig. They tend to be busy. They tend to be full. And so what I'm suggesting here as this habit and what I'm calling like our listeners to, what I call our church to, what I'm calling our family to, is to intentionally push back against like the rhythm of the secular calendar and embrace a weekly rhythm of rest. I want to suggest that this cannot be understated or overlooked. I think that I'm reminded of Jesus when he says like, what does it serve you to gain your life, insert whatever you want there for life, but lose your soul? And I want to suggest that what's at stake here is, without this weekly rhythm of regular rest, is losing the health of our soul. And so, Braid, your first habit there, talking about walking, has a lot to do with physical health. But as we talked about and as we read about, it's not just physical health. It transcends into spiritual and emotional and relational health. And I think the same thing is true of Sabbath, but like in the inverse. It's primarily about tending to our souls and our spirits, but also transcends into our physical health. I've heard it said this way, and this is how I internally define Sabbath, and ask myself, did I Sabbath rightly or correctly this week? Did I do anything that was beyond praying and playing? praying and playing. And if so, then I probably did a little bit too much work and not enough resting. Praying and playing, resting in the provision of God, that I don't have to produce anything today for my life to matter or for my week to go on, and resting in the presence of God, like just playing with the kids, playing with yourself, doing something that brings you something of leisure, that brings you joy, and praying, not just like in the closet, like we mentioned on another show with like on your knees with your hands clasped, but like being aware of the presence intimately of a relational God who wants to relate to us that way. Speak language one, as Eugene Peterson would say. So, yeah.
Eugene Peterson, we made it 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, Senator of the Sabbath Senator. Nice. I'm going to need a ruling on if this qualifies as Sabbath.
Okay.
7 hours of commercial-free football.
Yeah. Listen, I can't. Don't send your wives into my inbox to say to go home. Don't go home and tell your wife, hey, pastor of the Senator of Sabbath said
Senator
that all afternoon I have license to just sit on the couch and watch football.
It's commercial free.
Yes. But yeah, I think I think that is such a great example of doing nothing productive. And by some people's metrics, like maybe doing something, I don't know how they would define watching football, but I can imagine.
Well, look, sports gambling's legal, so hey, I cashed out.
Right? But doing nothing.
To be clear, I no longer sports gamble.
Right.
And have not for a while.
But just watching football, like that is permitted. I want to say that is permitted in the kingdom of God.
Not just permitted, perhaps encouraged.
Yep.
Wow, the Pauline prisoner.
How about that?
Senator of Sabbath.
Wow.
Holy habits. Praise God. Okay, my second habit. Subscribe to DAZN and or YouTube for NFL Sunday Ticket. No.
I just learned this week that it's pronounced DAZN.
Yeah.
That's the worst.
So in Canada, we watch football not through NFL Sunday Ticket. We don't have access to that. So we subscribe to it through a streaming service called DAZN. DAZN is spelled DAZN, which of course looks like Dazn, and is apparently DAZN.
Yeah.
So, okay.
And I would assume is a reference to D-zone, like defensive zone.
Oh, I thought it was more like I'm in the zone, man. I'm in the zone.
Yeah,
I'm
could be
watching
that too.
sports
Yeah.
with my bros.
Yeah, I guess.
Da-da-da, da-da-da.
Yeah.
Okay, second habit, sleeping. Didn't match the vibes there.
No, it's perfect.
Okay. So I have this written down is the more that's required of me, the more I prioritize my sleep. So this dovetails almost exactly off of how I described walking. And the reason I put these two down, and I was looking at all of the different like habits that I track and all of the different like rhythms of life that I have like formed. And I was like, okay, if I had to pick like just like the ones that are most important, it's the ones that I find myself doing more, the more that's required of me, which is paradoxical, which is why I think they are different from the others. Anytime something is paradoxical, I'm like, must be kingdom of God-ish.
Yeah.
And I will purposefully, using football as an example, I turned off Sunday Night Football on Sunday, and I turned it off Monday night at halftime before the game was over, before I knew if my fantasy team had won or not.
Yeah.
I was in a precarious situation. Spoiler alert. Got him. But I turned it off at halftime because I was like, I know I have to wake up at 5 a.m., which means I've got to fall asleep at 9 p.m.
Yeah.
And I will sacrifice things like that to protect my sleep. Now, I was walking this morning, and I saw a tweet from a Blue Jays pitcher. Did you see this?
This is just about the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
So Jays won last night, but their pitcher had to exit the game with cramps. They ask him, hey, are you going to be okay? Like, is it serious? You never know with these pitchers. And he goes, yeah, I think I just didn't get enough sleep last night. I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, yeah, no, I only got 11 or 12, and I need 13 or 14 hours of sleep.
This is a man with young children.
That means going to bed at 9 and waking up at like 10.
I don't think I've ever 11. Slept that long in my life, and he can't function without. And now function. He's a professional sports player, but he can't do his job without cramping if he's not getting more than half of the day unconscious.
I don't like. I don't think that's healthy. Like, I think the only people that sleep that long are like in depressive states.
Right.
That was my understanding. Hey, I'm not a sleep expert, but here are the things that I do to maintain sleep hygiene. I have an 8 sleep mattress, which is like the most expensive thing I've ever bought for sleep. So this is a mattress cover that regulates temperature. And so I can open the app and it does all the tracking, which we'll get into the metrics here in a second, but I can choose, okay, I want my mattress cover to be cold when I fall asleep, and then it will track the different cycles of sleep and match the heat of the mattress with the cycle. So it's actually warmer when you wake up because that is more conducive to waking up smoothly. And the other side of the mattress where my wife is, she can control that on her own.
Wow.
Now, we had this mattress cover and it broke, and it's cooled and heated with water. So then my wife was just in a puddle of water for a while. Unfortunately, I was in Europe at the time. So that was unfortunate, but we reached out to them and no questions asked. They sent us a new one for free, and that one has been going really great. Our house, the furnace is not great at reaching the top level. And so our room has always been really hot. And this is like so important for sleep. You need to sleep in a cool room. We did everything that we could, and this mattress cover was actually the most cost effective, say for like installing a second furnace or a second air conditioning unit or redoing all the ducts or whatever. So that's been really positive. Blackout curtains, huge. And then rain machine. We didn't do this until we had a kid, but ever since, so now 8 years, we've been sleeping with sound machines, which is really great, especially because you hear a little sound at night. You're like, oh my goodness, what is that? I don't know. We're always scared, like, oh no, someone's breaking in, and whatever it is. Now, I do break the cardinal sin of sleep hygiene, and that is we don't turn off the TV before bed. My wife will very commonly fall asleep with the TV on. And by every metric, I have about as good a sleep as anyone can have. And so this doesn't seem to be bothering us, but I'm pretty sure if you told a doctor, like, no, an hour or more without any TV. I also don't eat very close to bed,
right,
which is a big one as well. Sleep with kids is hard. So this is, of course, hey, caveat, do the best you can with your kids. My daughter, not the young one, my 8-year-old woke me up at 3 a.m. last night and said she had a bad dream. And so that messed up my sleep because I looked and it was 3:30 and I knew I was waking up at 5. And that final hour and a half was not great. And she's always had bad sleep. Our 14-month-old, we did sleep training with her at 5 months old. She really took to it and sleeps perfectly 14 hours a night.
You and me were 2 peas in a pod last night, proverbially, because my
both
son
up.
woke up at about 1:37, asking to sleep in the big bed. So that's where me and him slept last night. Slept.
Yeah,
using
sure.
that term loosely.
Yeah, we had a sleepover. Lil gets one sleepover a week, so she's been taking it on Sunday nights. And that was a rough go of it.
Yeah.
That 5 a.m. wake up call was actually welcome because she was, just like draped all over me. I figured it'd be worthwhile kind of hitting kind of my sleep metrics to just provide some context. So these are for the last 6 months. I've averaged 7 hours and 30 minutes asleep. What's cool about the 8 Sleep mattress versus Sleep Cycle, which is the app you're using right now, is that it tracks when you are asleep and not just when the phone on the nightstand thinks you're sleeping.
Right.
The Sleep Cycle app, which Alex is looking at now, and what I have used for a decade before the mattress, was always, I think, a bit extending on how much time I thought I was asleep. Yeah. So, what does yours say?
I'm trying to see here. On average, I'm getting like 7. Looks like about 7 hours of sleep a night.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty good with a 2.5-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah, we go to bed early. I wake up at 6.
Yeah, so my bedtime, 9:52 average, wake up average 6:05. It takes me 29 minutes on average to fall asleep, 1 minute on average to wake up, and a 92 sleep fitness score, which is an aggregate of all the different metrics that the 8 Sleep mattress cover tracks.
I would like to suggest that, similar to Sabbath, prioritizing sleep in a capitalist culture is a little bit countercultural. And I would like to suggest that prioritizing sleep is actually an active embodiment of our measure of trust in the provision of God. That when we are asleep, God is still at work. He created before we ever had the chance to create, and will be creating long before we're done creating. Not to say that our work isn't meaningful and that our works of faith aren't worth something, but it is all grace, and choosing to prioritize sleep and rest and being unconscious is actually proof of how much do I trust God to be doing the work here, and how much am I trusting my own my own, whatever I can create with my own hands, my own, however productive I can be. Mm-hmm. Anyways, so that's a bit of a stretch.
I love that.
I'm suggesting that. Our fourth habit, my second, is simply silence. I went with a bit of alliteration here for my three. Sabbath first and silence. And this is...
oh boy.
Well, I'm just like, as we're working this out, I'm recognizing that a lot of our habits here are like pretty countercultural to the world that we currently live in here in our context in the West. Like,
You haven't gotten to my third habit, get money.
but like walking is not popular. It's not efficient as far as like getting anywhere quickly or like making the use of our time.
I never see anyone my age.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
Demographics of community and neighborhood aside, but like I always find that interesting. It's like the older folks, like they're like, no, you should just do this. This is so
Yes.
important. They all realize it.
And if anyone's watched the documentary it's a series, but with Zac Efron on Netflix, I'm forgetting what it's called, like
He
Wild
goes to
Earth or something like that.
Iceland and ice baths.
But one episode he went to Italy and they went to this little place, which is a blue zone. There are a handful of these blue zones across the planet where scientists have observed that folks who live here generally live healthier and longer lives, and we're interested in why. And one of them was in Italy, and it's hysterical because I'm Italian by heritage, and so I felt at home watching this episode. And these Italian folks are just like eating pasta and drinking wine. You know, it's like that's their steady diet. It's just like carbs and alcohol. But where they were was a blue zone. And one of the hypotheses for why folks live so well and so long here is that they walk everywhere they go and they don't automate a lot of like labor, and not even just strenuous labor, but like they walk to the grocery store and carry their groceries home.
Sure.
For example. So all of those things in a way of like compounding interest, I guess counteract for all the carbs in the wine, or maybe carbs and wine are really the secret to good health. But they attribute a lot of the longevity of life there to just like walking and like lifting things, as opposed to, I don't know, having someone else lift them for you or like using a lever or a device to lift them. Anyways, silence. This one's countercultural as well. We live in a time and an age where there's just like, we're just inundated with so much information, and beyond information, so much like language that is motivational in nature, whether it's like motivate us to do something or motivate us to buy something. Like so much of what we intake, both consciously and unconsciously, is advertisement. And it's just, I don't know if anyone resonates with this, but it's just loud. And so one habit that has really cultivated some newfound health in my life is cultivating times of silence. And this is hard for me because, you know, we talk about walking or when I'm in the car. It's really hard for me to do it in silence. And sometimes I'm not good at it. Like sometimes I'll be on a walk with my son. He's in the stroller. He's looking at stuff. And I know that I should not have an AirPod in listening to something. I'm listening to something really valuable. It's not just music. I'm listening to a podcast or something. And I know I shouldn't, I know deep down in myself, like I should just be quiet right now. And it's hard. So what I'm trying to say is it's hard to cultivate these times and sometimes extended seasons of silence. But I think it's necessary. I think it's required. And so simply that could look like habits of unplugging. So you talk about sleep. And for us, it's like we don't do phones in bed. And so like if we've got something to do on our phone, we do it before we get in the bedroom. When we get in the bedroom, it's like phone is off and on the nightstand.
Bless you for that.
I really try for my phone to be not be the first thing I'm on in the morning. So I get up, I make a coffee, I read for usually an hour before I'm like plugging into something. For me, it's my phone's always on Do Not Disturb, and I'm sorry for that. And I'm apologizing.
You've been pretty good lately with the texts.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll slack you for personal things. I'm like,
that.
oh, you've noticed that. And then if you don't get back to me, I can be like, look, employee Alex,
Yes.
be my friend.
Yeah. So yeah, and that requires discipline. If I'm going to have my phone on silent, I do have to choose to tend to it in certain moments. So it's a balance. But it could look like an extended period of unplugging from the internet or from podcasts or from whatever. For me, spiritually, it's looked like adopting the practice of Lectio Divina, which is in other words, in English, sacred reading, which is a way to read the scriptures that involves a lot of silence. You read the scripture and then you meditate quietly on something that popped out to you in the scripture. Then you pray, then you contemplate, which is simply to sit in silence. Like no pre-existing thoughts, like just bring your mind to the space and sit with Jesus, to just contemplate with Jesus. So I've adopted that in my own life, which is at first a hard thing to cultivate because I just want more and more and more information.
Yeah.
This is taking a passage of scripture or a passage of reading and just sitting with it, not moving beyond it. But we started doing it in our church community too. And the first few times we did it, it was really uncomfortable. Like that empty space in the church environment was like awkward.
Right.
Because that's not something, at least in the church in the West, there's not a whole lot of room for silence in our spaces. They're just really full with announcements and worship and the word, and like it's all good. But making room for silence has been uncomfortable, but it's been so good for us. And then I've got one more example, and this is where I am informing you that I'm going to need to take a few days off of work.
Oh, wow.
Because something that I think could be really valuable for people for like a global reset is a silent retreat. So there is a retreat center here in Niagara Falls called Mount Carmel. And they do silent retreats where you go and like it's against the rules to talk. So also against the rules to like ingest anything. Like
what about my podcast? I can listen to those.
No. So I'm gonna need a few days off work at some point to go do a silent retreat, and we can turn it into content. I'll come back and we can talk about it on the show. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't know. If anyone's done a silent retreat, you can text into the text line or comment on this video. I want to hear what your experience is like because it's something I've always been curious about doing and wanted to do.
Yeah.
But just seems like a little too much.
I'd be at the silent retreat and like 30 seconds in, someone would hear.
You've got a burner phone because they take your phone when you go in.
What are you doing? I'm on zone.
Yeah, I couldn't do it.
Oh no, my fantasy team. Okay, I have some. I have some research to supplement and what you were saying.
Okay, great.
And this is from one of the books that I highlighted on a recent episode where we talked about 3 books that have influenced our Christian ministry and The Comfort Crisis. So they have an entire chapter dedicated to this. So here's some data from that. We have increased the world's loudness 4-fold. Do you remember when I took out that giant stack of papers on that episode?
Yeah.
This is the digital version.
They're right there. You could bring them over and consult the research.
Oh! Just a sec. Wait. Oh, we still have it. On my silent retreat, can I have paper?
I don't know. I haven't got that far into
Am I allowed to read?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, I can read.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, this is okay, just let me just in, okay. Uh-oh, I'm messing up the papers here. This is great TV. Everyone loves this. Okay. Look at that. We have increased the world's loudness 4-fold.
Yep.
Based on an average of a 20 decibel rise. Scientists at the University of Michigan say that more than 100 million Americans live with noise levels louder than what you'd hear standing next to a working washing machine or dishwasher. Yeah. So 70 decibels. We've in fact become so used to living in noise that most of us now found comfort in the constant blare. Another survey found that Americans increasingly see the TV not as an entertainment device, but as a companion. Hey, I'm falling asleep with it.
Yeah.
The constant noise is more than enough to stress us out, according to the CDC. And marinating in stress has consequences. What noises cause hearing loss? Just reading out this data. And then the final one, this is from WHO. The constant stream of decibels that we live in are quite literally taking years off of our lives. Too much noise was directly responsible for nearly 2,000 heart attacks in Europe.
Wow.
So
it's like no wonder we all feel so overstimulated.
Absolutely.
And our window of tolerance is so razor thin.
You laughed at me.
No, that's amazing. That was like a month ago that you printed out that research. I'm like, what are we doing? It was a prompt, but that was actually very useful.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, no wonder. So like what I'm appealing to like the, the philosophical bit, but physiologically, the noise is having real measurable impacts on our body. So my appeal there is to cultivating a habit of silence in various forms. It doesn't have to be a silent retreat, just unplug from your phone for an hour a day or something. But yeah, a little more silence.
My third habit, being unoffendable. And I have to credit you for being the one that phrased it that way. Someone that publishes a lot of content online, you just get a lot of criticism. Relatively tiny amount of criticism because people like our stuff and we make good stuff. But when you get 10,000 comments, even if 100 of them are negative, do most of us, I never got 100 negative comments in my first 2 decades of life.
Right.
And so that has become something that is also, you have to learn to filter, and being unoffendable has been the mantra that I have revisited and returned to help me kind of sift through all of these things. And what's great is when you can be unoffendable, you can actually make improvements because you're not on the defensive. You're not unwilling to hear things. Yeah. I'm not trying to hear that right now, because you don't see them as a threat, but either something that can just be brushed off your shoulder or an opportunity to improve. Yeah. And if you know me, any opportunity to improve, even if you tell it to me in a hurtful way, I will see as a gift. I might have to take a step back first, reassess from altitude, reference to a previous episode, but it's a gift. And my friend Michael Tuzinski, who runs Church Media Squad, I thought he said it in a great way. We're talking about, hey, when we're working with our creative team, he's like, what I always tell them is take your work seriously, not yourself. So you really care about what you're doing. But he's like, what we found is when we're working with creatives and churches are working with creatives, churches are oh, I don't want to say something that's too mean and hurt this creative's feelings, because I've had creatives in the past that have been a bit touchy. And he's like, no, if we want to create something good for a church, we have to be able to not take ourselves seriously. If you have a problem with this work, I worked really hard on it and I'm going to take it seriously to deliver something good to you, but you're not going to hurt my feelings. And I think that's such a great posture. This is really just about posture. How can you present yourself to the world? Because if you are on the defensive all the time, you're closing yourself off. And when you are closed off, you are, by definition, not open to all of the good things that the world has for you. And so being unoffendable is not only a way to maintain and ensure your mental health, but it's also, I think, effective and the best way to, explore all the opportunities that are going to come along to you, because you're just open to stuff.
Yeah. In my experience with cultivating this discipline or this habit, a lot of folks will ask me okay, but how do you become unoffendable?
Right.
And the answer to that question is basically inarticulate. I don't know, other than, and maybe just giving this language to our listeners will be helpful enough. Hearing that phrase, being unoffendable, it's just, in my experience, it's just been having that in the back of my mind, so that when offense comes, somehow I bring myself to make an active choice to to not let offense come to me and be unoffendable. But beyond that, I don't actually know how to do it. I just know that it gets easier with practice.
Yeah, and offense basically comes to you in the form of a sensation. And talking about my daughter learning the clarinet, it's kind of like that. The first time she started playing the clarinet in the house, you heard it and you jumped in your seat because it was such a loud, shrill noise. And then after you've heard it a bunch, it's just as shrill, it's just as loud, but your response to it has been lessened.
Right.
I have received hundreds of negative comments online. So now when I receive one, it doesn't hurt in the same way. So you start by articulating a value, being unoffendable. That's the value. And you say, I want to live by this value. And what will happen is you will have opportunities to live by that value. And the more you practice it, the more it becomes habit. The more you have that habit, the longer you live by it, the more it becomes identity. And then you're always responding in the same way. Now, the sensation, it might sometimes, sometimes people will say something that are so crazy, that I'm that it kind of brings about that same sensation. And so you're always kind of re-practicing it. But the more you practice something, it's just like any muscle, the more that you grow it. But you first need to articulate the value. It's funny how this works in the same way, with church social media and church communications. Hey, articulate the policies. And then when you have an opportunity to live by the policy, take it. Because otherwise the policy is useless. You can't just make a value. If you don't live by it, it's nothing.
That's right.
Ooh. Some might say it's a clanging gong. No,
Nice.
It's a clanging cymbal. What is the gong doing? Resounding gong. You hate a resounding gong.
Yeah, you really do. You put good language to this as well in a video that is a year old now at this point, when you were talking about reacting versus responding. And that's how
I did come up with that. I did not hear that anywhere else.
But that's how responding to, or that's how engaging with offense sometimes feels. It's when it first comes, there is this, again, a callback to an earlier episode, there is this temptation to let your amygdala flare up and react out of whatever that's making you feel. but taking a moment, a deep breath, removing yourself and gaining some perspective via altitude will help you respond rather than react.
Yeah.
So I mentioned earlier that I was going for some alliteration. Now this is alliteration by sound, not by sight.
Oh, I see what you did.
So Sabbath, silence, and this last one, psychotherapy. And this one came to me because of the title of this episode is, 7 habits you need to survive Christian ministry. And
Is that what influenced the alliteration?
No.
You survive by Sabbath, silence, and psychotherapy.
I mean, we could rewrite the intro right now.
Do you have a poem to share, Pastor Alex?
That's it. That is the poem.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And we're young at this. I've been doing Christian ministry for 10 years, and so I've haven't survived anything yet. Like we're just on our way. But I'm so thankful to be living and ministering in a time, in a moment in culture where therapy, counseling, psychotherapy is culturally not just accepted, but like endorsed, encouraged. Our parents didn't grow up in an environment like that. There was quite a bit of baggage, taboo around the idea of getting help from a counselor or a therapist. And, folks that I know who grew up in a time like that are feeling the reverberations, the consequences of that now. But they're older, and so now they feel liberated and empowered to do the work, but have so much more lived experience that like on an actual physiological level in their brain, it's so much harder to get out of those grooves and rewrite new neural pathways. And so I want to say first and foremost that like I'm just so thankful to live in a time where I don't feel ashamed to go to therapy. And so far in my 10 years of Christian ministry and looking forward into the future, psychotherapy has been a really vital piece for me, both and for me, there have been two versions of it. One, like a sustained relationship with a therapist where you're talking every month just to have a measure of accountability and an objective voice speaking into just the ins and outs of your life, but then also in moments of crisis. So relationships with therapists that maybe aren't ongoing, but like something happens in your life, whether it's traumatic or what have you, where you need to work this out with someone who's going to give you some tools, some skills to navigate this well and not carry this trauma as baggage beyond where you're meant to carry it. And so simply like, that's all I have to say is like having a habit, whether it looks like one or either of those versions, whether it's a regular relationship with a therapist that comes at a greater expense. That's one of those bills every 4 weeks, which those bills are not small by any measure. Or just considering going to a therapist when you are navigating really something challenging in your life. Either way, I think it's an essential habit for anyone to survive, and not just survive, but thrive in Christian ministry over a lifetime. Because especially in pastoral work, you're walking through stuff with people that is really heavy, that you are meant to bear with them, but not entirely meant to be burdened by in your own personal life. That can feel like an incredible weight. And so even maybe your relationship is just, your therapy relationship is just having someone being a listening ear, just where you can go to them and share all the stuff that you hear in your pastoral office that you don't need to bring home to your spouse. That's been really valuable to me as well. Yeah. So that's it. My gratitude and my appeal to psychotherapy, a relationship with a therapist, a counselor, a biblical counselor if you want. I've had all shapes and sizes of therapists. I've gone to like psychotherapists who have no religious affiliation or background. Right now I'm in a relationship with like an older man who's a Christian counselor, and I'm getting something totally different from him, but something that I need right now.
Huh.
So yeah.
Is that person Eugene Peterson from the grave?
No, but he went to the college that Eugene Peterson, he went to Regent College in Vancouver, where Eugene Peterson was a professor.
Oh.
In one of our first sessions, I mentioned like, hey, this is what I'm going through this year. This is who I'm reading. And I just saw this smirk come across his face. And he said to me, he's like, of all of the influences in my Christian life. Oh, and he's a Presbyterian priest as well.
Oh,
as
nice.
Eugene Peterson
The
was.
Arrow Presbyterian.
Exactly. He said Eugene Peterson is like that guy for me. And so he stepped off the camera for a moment, not very far because the books were at hand. And he like came over with this pile of Eugene Peterson books. So we do share that.
And you were like, okay, that is a great
Yeah.
first interaction.
Yeah.
So you described therapy as an objective voice. And I have found that to be one of the biggest benefits of having a therapist, because, you know, you have like these like narratives in your own head. And like, this is how I'm seeing it. They're like, yeah, okay, well, your behaviors and the way you're describing it, like, have you ever thought about seeing it this way? And you're like, oh, it can just be as simple as that.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads into my final habit, and the final habit that we have collectively, which is having a framework for honest evaluation. And I will be honest here, like, I'm still working on this. I don't feel like I always have this down. And the reason I know that is because anytime someone like provides that type of insight for me, and I don't really have a great like consistent stream of this, so they'll happen intermittently. And someone will say something, I'm like, wait, that was happening this whole time? And the reason I feel like I don't have a good grasp on this yet, and why I'm striving towards it, is because I just wish I had known earlier. Like, this would have been such a gift if I had known earlier. So here's a really small example of this without getting like too personal. So the other day, a little while ago, I'm texting with my buddy Sean Cannell, and he's like, dude, cool that you're doing a video podcast. I told you to do that like years ago. And I was like, okay, Sean, thanks. And he's like, your thumbnails are horrible. And I was like, yeah, they are. And I was like, I know. And then and then he's like, also, you should consider changing the intros to be like this instead. And I was like, why? Like, we're following like this other creator. We think like they have good intros. He's like, yeah, but here's why contextually it's different. And he went into like the nitty gritty that only someone who does YouTube for a living like would be able, because he's like, you're right. Like, objectively, you're doing the same thing, but here's why it doesn't actually translate in the same way. And it was like a big light bulb moment. And I was like, what a gift that he would like take time out of his day to criticize, but like criticize as a gift. Like, that was a gift to receive that. And we were talking about this, texting back and forth earlier this week. It was one of the times, well, man, it was amazing. You texted me. I know if I text you early in the morning, you're going to have to look at your phone eventually, and then I'll be there already. It's one of my moves to get you to text me back. So I texted you, and we were talking about...
I texted you. I started the conversation.
See, I'm so used to it being the other way. What a gift. You texted me.
Yes, I was thinking about you, and I texted you. Yeah.
That's true love.
Yeah.
What did you text me?
No, I started the conversation talking about this thing.
Yeah, right. So we start talking about, like, how do you remove yourself, essentially, from the center of your worldview? Because what happens is we all, by default, live at the center of our own worldview. No one thinks about us as much as we do because we live as us. So it's just by nature what happens. But having a Christ-centered worldview means that Christ has to be at the center, not you. And so we were talking about, like, how do you square like a theological belief with the fact that you might have 2 camps, 10 camps that all believe differently on it. And you're like, well, one great exercise is, and maybe I'll just let you describe it, talking about Christian history and weighing things against in that way.
Yes. Yeah.
I can also describe it the way I heard it, but it was your idea.
Yeah. I was just saying that, like, and we were talking about Christian community, and I think one great way to hold those various theological beliefs, whether it's on a small thing or a big thing, is to hold it up against not just our interpretation of Scripture, because that often is self-reflective, but to hold it up against...
That's the word, self-reflective.
Yeah.
That was what was so profound.
Like, hold it up against the history and the story of the church. So hold it up against, like, the journey of God's people in Israel, but then also the testimony of the church for the last 2,000 years, and see what people have had to say about it over time. Because we're not the first people to wrestle with this. So how has it been engaged with over time? And hold it up against that, at least not for proof, but at the very least for insight into, like, okay, how have other people answered this question throughout not just decades, but centuries of faithful Christian witness?
Yeah, and what was profound to me is, like, over time, like, the creep is going to be your theology is formed around you. It becomes a mirror of you. It is self-reflective. And the last thing that I would want would be my quote-unquote Christ-centered worldview, to be a Brady-centered worldview that I'm claiming is Christ-centered. That's even worse than just being like, yeah, I live for me. It's like saying you live for you, but it's actually Jesus. That's even worse.
Yeah.
And so the way that we evaluate becomes so important, not just for evaluating your behaviors, but evaluating your beliefs, which of course influence your behaviors. I was talking with a friend of mine this past week, and he just sold his company. So we were like, exciting times, like, hey, great for you. You know, it was great for his family. And we've been friends for about 10 years in business. And I was like, hey, like, you said something like about me, like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean I act differently now? And he's like, oh, well, like, we used to get on these calls and you'd be moving like a mile a minute. And he's a bit of like he's more of like a cerebral creative, so he moves at a bit of a slower pace in our conversations. And I'm just like, he's like, you would just be like, I couldn't even get a word in. And I was like, it's so great to hear that. But I am like 8 years removed from that in this case. And so I've moved beyond that. Like I want to get more insight into those types of things. And so I have a habits of joy spreadsheet, which I found is helpful because it gets objective data onto the screen. You know, we were talking about sleeping, right? Like I don't just claim I get good sleep. Like I have the data here and I have it from multiple applications. And so even if one is, you know, over-indexed in one metric or another, it's being balanced by the other application, let's say. And so that becomes hard data, which means then you can say objectively, I have achieved these things based on my values. But then your own lived experience is so much in your head and internal that you don't always get those things. And as much as we want to say the quiet part out loud, let's say, you know, from a previous episode, you don't always just go to your friends and be like, you know what, here are the 8 things that I think you just really suck at. Like sometimes just
and you don't want to be a person who has a habit of being critical of others.
Yeah, and in other things, it's like you say it and it's like, oh, that can never be unsaid. Like, is that even worth it? Like, and so I actually don't have a fully formed solution for this. I have a few in different arenas, but it's not expansive. And maybe it's a fool's errand to believe that, like, oh, I can have a full understanding of myself. Like one thing I've thought would be extremely valuable and probably horrendous is to have a camera on you at all times, just to know like how you carry yourself, how you stand, like how you come off. Because once you watch it, it's what's great about making YouTube videos. I can see, but I'm still like prepared now. I'm still playing Brady on the screen as I teach about church comms and church social. So it's still very distinct from like having a camera on you 24/7. And like I mean an invisible camera to like truly know like what you're doing.
I wouldn't want to see that.
No, I wouldn't either.
I don't need that much honest evaluation.
Yeah, exactly. So
that's a lot.
So maybe I'm striving for this for too much. Any final thoughts?
No, I think these.
Ooh, I just got a call from Italy. Maybe it's from the Blue Zone.
Maybe. I'm curious to know, speaking of honest evaluation, I'm curious to know what we will say about this 10 years from now.
Well, that's why we're making it.
Yeah.
Record of truth.
Like what not what we will say about these things, because I believe these things are, you know, will stand the test of time, but
turns out walking was a farce. It was the new smoking.
Yeah. But I am curious to know what we will uncover in the next 10 years about ourselves and our ministries and what habits we will have adopted over that time. That over the course of a lifetime will hopefully translate into being people who not just survive ministry or work or life, but thrive and have habitual practices that not just contribute to our own personal health, but the health of the people that we influence, our friends, our workmates, our families. That's the journey, I think. And so, yeah, I'm anxious to meet 10-year later versions of us.
I'm anxious for the next Sabbath.
We do have a fantasy football draft today. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks as always, everyone, for your time, attention, and trust. And we will talk to you next week.
We need one of those soundboards to do drops.
No, that was like our really lo-fi way of doing it. Oh, man.
I'd get in trouble with one of those.